chapter 2. 2 Samuel chapter 2. Of course, just to recap a little bit of 2 Samuel chapter 1, that is where David finds out that Saul died. So we have finished our Bible study of 1 Samuel, and we decided just to go on into 2 Samuel. So in chapter 1, David finds out that Saul has died. And of course, many years before this time, Samuel had anointed David as the next king. So David is supposed to be the king after Saul. Now, if you don't study your Bible very much, and if all of your information comes from just like your Sunday school in childhood, you would think that the way the Old Testament works, Saul was the king of Israel, then David was the king of Israel, then Solomon was the king of Israel, and then it broke into two nations. And oftentimes we get this idea that maybe, hey, just right after Saul, David took over. But 2 Samuel chapter 2 makes clear that's not the case. It is actually quite a bit of a struggle for David to take the throne. Even though even though Samuel anointed David to be the next king, the kingdom is not just handed to David. Even after that, we know that this is God's plan that David become king, and he does become king, but David has to do a little bit of work himself. And, that's a good overall lesson for us as well. Just because you may feel that God has called you to do something doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy thing to do. God still expects us to do work. There's a saying that sometimes comes to mind: God helps those who help themselves. Not really a biblical teaching, but there is some truth to it. That God is going to give you the path, but you've got to walk down the path. And God is going to give you the victory if he wants you to do something, but you've got to get in there and have some action and do it. You can't just sit back. We are not Presbyterians. We don't just sit back and wait for things to happen, because that's what they're known for, the frozen chosen or whatever. We don't do that. We need to actively pursue the plan that God has laid out for us. And that's what David has to do, and it's not easy. He doesn't become king right after Saul. It takes him a while to unite the kingdom. It takes him 10 years to become king over all of Israel. So we see some of that start here in this chapter. So 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1, "And it came to pass after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up into any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said unto him, Go up. And David said, Whither shall I go up? And he said, Unto Hebron. So David went up thither, and his two wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, Nabal's wife, the Carmelite. And his men that were with him did David bring up, every man with his household. And they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. And the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul." So David starts by asking God, hey, how do you want me to handle this now that Saul's dead? To get a little bit of context here, Saul's dead. The Philistines have conquered Israel. Israel right now is a complete and total mess, total anarchy. They have no king, and they just got beat bad in battle. And so David asks God, he says, well, should I go up to any of the cities there? And, the Lord tells him to go to Hebron. Now, Hebron is an area that David is very familiar with. When he was hiding out from Saul, he spent a lot of time in this area in hiding. Of course, David is from Bethlehem, which is in Judah, so he's from that area. And if we remember at the end of 1 Samuel, David, when he beat up on basically the Amalekites and all those, he conquered all those lands. Of that spoil, he sent presents into Judah. So they're very familiar with David, and they're ready to make him king. So they come up to make him king, but he's just king over Judah. That's it. Of course, we know that there are 12 tribes in Israel. So he's king over Judah, probably a lot of Levites, some of that southern kingdom there, some stragglers maybe or something from some other tribes. But by and large, the northern part of the kingdom, which is Israel, they don't make David king. And then while the men of Judah, of course, are making David king, they mention that the men of Jabesh Gilead, who are not in Judah, they're not coming up to make David king, the men of Jabesh Gilead, the kindness that they showed to Saul after he had died. They went and took his body, burned it, buried it, made sure that it wasn't desecrated or anything or made fun of. So verse 5 there, and David sent messengers unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, and said unto them, Blessed be ye of the Lord, that ye have showed this kindness unto your Lord, even unto Saul, and have buried him. And now the Lord show kindness and truth unto you, and I also will requite you this kindness, because you have done this thing. Therefore now let your hands be strengthened, and be ye valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah have anointed me king over them. So we can get an idea here a little bit of David's ability to unite and his ability as a politician. If we fast forward to after Solomon's reign, David's son Solomon, his son Rehoboam treats the people that are thinking about, hey, we may break away or something. He treats them pretty harshly. He tries to rule them with an iron fist. David is more conciliatory towards the 10 northern tribes and towards Jabesh Gilead, because he says, hey, you guys really, you did good by Saul, who was king. He said, and I have great respect for you for the way you treated Saul, and I hope you prosper. Oh, by the way, I'm now king of Judah. Just kind of throwing that out there. Maybe you guys might want to consider making me your king as well. Maybe it's what he's saying there or something like that. But he kind of just throws that at the end there. But he doesn't demand, or he doesn't, send an army out. He's not going to take the rest of Israel by force unless he has to. He's going to allow them to make their own decisions and, come to him as king when the time is right. So, and not only when the time is right for him, but when the time is right for the Lord as well. David is a very patient man. He has waited on the Lord. So, a person who's not that patient might say, hey, I was anointed by Samuel. I am king over everybody. If you don't want me to be king, get ready, my army's coming. And David had a great army. The core 600 did wonderful things, and they were excellent fighters, probably the best in all of Israel. So, he has the military strength. But he prefers the way of peace. This is important to note. He wants peace first. He doesn't want to just take everything by force. Verse 8, but Abner, the son of Ner, captain of Saul's host, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. So a lot of people don't realize that don't study the Bible. There was actually a king of Israel named Ishbosheth, and this is him right here, Saul's son. But he's kind of a weakling. He's kind of a, he's like, because Saul had several sons, at least 4. And this guy, Ishbosheth, is 40 years old, but he's not a warrior because he didn't die in the battle with the Philistines. Saul's 3 sons had 3 sons that died in battle with him, against the Philistines, Ishbosheth was not one of them. He stayed home. So it makes me think he's kind of a weakling, and you get the idea that he's kind of a weak guy as you go through this. But Abner is not weak at all. Abner is a great warrior. He was Saul's number 2 man. Abner and Saul were first cousins. Their dads were brothers. If you go back and look in 1 Samuel, and you can see that. And so Abner survived the battle with the Philistines, and he is now the main power in Israel. He's the force to be reckoned with, because he's the only one left from that old regime. And he's a tough guy, lifelong military guy, all of that. And so while he sets up Ishbosheth as king, really the real power behind the throne, as you see in these verses, is Abner, Saul's cousin. There's nothing new under the sun. Do you really think that Joe Biden runs the United States of America? No. Joe Biden has trouble stringing, sentences together. He has trouble coming up with complete thoughts. He's not able to do anything. He was always, a liar and kind of just a politician. But now his mind's going, and it's even worse. He's not the guy that's setting policy. He's not the guy that's running everything. There are people behind the scenes that are not elected that are doing that, and it's always been that way. So that's kind of Abner. He's the power behind the throne in the northern kingdom. And so he takes Ishbosheth there in verse 8, the son of Saul, and brings him over to Mahanaim and made him king over Gilead and over the Asherites and over Jezreel and over Ephraim and over Benjamin and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and reigned 2 years, but the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months. So things don't just happen right away. David, it takes him 7.5 years. He's just king of Judah only. And Ishbosheth is king of the northern part of Israel for 2 years. And the whole of Israel is a mess anyways, because the Philistines have encroached on Israel. They've got probably half of Israel's land themselves. So, David has a part of it. Ishbosheth has a part of it. Probably the Philistines have a part of it. There's no real leader. A lot of chaos. A lot of stuff going on there. And there's a lot to be learned from this. Israel only becomes strong when they unite behind one strong leader. And you look at that, I look at that in every aspect of life. This has to be the truth. If you want a well-run unit, you need a well-respected and strong leader to run it, and there can only be one that makes the final decision. If we look at a church is not going to go very well if you've got 16 co-pastors. And I've been in churches that have not run well with even a pastor and an assistant pastor who used to be a pastor. They fuss and fight, they argue. You got to have one. Sorry, there can only be one pastor here. So at least while I'm here, there won't be an assistant or a co-pastor or anything like that. Now we'll have, obviously, I have deacons and, Linda and Tracy and people that are probably more valuable to the church than I am. But when it comes to the leader of the church, there can only be one to make it run smooth, to make the final decisions and all these things. As much as I hate to make decisions, I know that when it comes right down to it, I'm expected to make the decisions for this church, no matter what they are. If someone asks, hey, what should we do here? I have to be able to tell them pretty much, because that's If you don't have that, you have chaos. Go all the way down to like family units. The world will tell you, husband and wife need to be completely equal in the family. Wrong. Now, in a perfect family, or in a family that's close to perfect, because my family was not perfect, but we did it this way. I was the boss as well there. Tanya made a lot of decisions. My wife made a lot of decisions on her own, but any of the big decisions were always run by me. I was one that decided when we would go on vacation. I was one that decided when we would buy a car, what house we would get. All of those decisions boiled down to me. She made a lot of decisions as well, but there's one leader. When there's more than one leader, there's chaos. If mom and dad are completely equal and you have kids, they will play mom and dad off of each other and they'll be arguing forever. And so, what did your mom say? What did your dad say? They try to do that. If we have one clear person in charge and mom says, go ask your dad, and everybody knows that he's in charge, then what he says goes. But if it's kind of wishy-washy on both sides, hey, go ask your dad. Oh, go ask your mom. They wind up getting away with all sorts of things. So it has to be one clear leader, and there's not one right now in Israel, and that's what causes such a mess in Israel, as we'll see in the rest of this chapter. And the rest of this chapter is a good lesson on war. There's a lot in here about the realities of warfare. We as human beings tend to love war. James says, from whence comes fightings and warrings among you? It comes because of your lusts and because of your corruptness, all sorts of things. James says that in James chapter 4. And we see a lot of the realities of war here, because basically what we're going to have here is a civil war in Israel. The northern kingdom under Abner and Ishbosheth are going to fight against David and his people in the southern kingdom. So there's a civil war that breaks out right here before David is even able to take over everything. There are some people that resist him so much that they're going to fight against him. So verse 12, and Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. So this is an interesting story here. It's a good story, and I'm mostly going to read it, but I'm going to pull out just a few points here because it is relevant to the way warfare is done. So verse 12, and Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. So Abner and Ishbosheth's guys are heading towards Judah. And Joab, verse 13, and Joab the son of Zeruiah. Now Zeruiah is the sister of David, just so you know. So Joab is a nephew of David. And Joab the son of Zeruiah and the servants of David went out and met together by the pool of Gibeon. And they sat down, the one on the one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. So Abner has a bunch of people, doesn't say really how many, but a large number, and they are heading towards Judah, and they get to the pool of Gibeon. Joab, who is one of David's main generals, has a bunch of David's servants. They head out to the pool of Gibeon as well to sort of see what Abner's intentions are. So now we've got Joab and his people sitting on one side of the pool, Abner and his people sitting on the other side of the pool. And, they all come from the same basic nation of Israel. You've got the 10 northern tribes and the tribe of Judah, but all the tribes came from brothers. So, and up until this point, they were all part of the nation of Israel. But now they're sort of split. And so they're meeting at this pool. Verse 14, and Abner said to Joab, let the young men now arise and play before us. And Joab said, let them arise. Then there arose and went over by number 12 of Benjamin, which pertained to Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 of the servants of David. And they caught everyone his fellow by the head, and thrust his sword in his fellow's side, so they fell down together. Wherefore that place was called Helkathazurim, which is in Gibeon. So this is kind of weird and a little bit comical, a little bit funny. You know, Abner and Joab, by the way, who are getting ready to start the civil war, do not actually participate in the battle themselves. There's a lesson right there as well. You know, all of these political leaders out there in the world, you know, Putin, we got to take Ukraine. He's not out there with a gun. You know, he's stirring things up, but then he's not doing anything. Yeah, and oftentimes people just set these leaders up on, you know, pedestals about how great they are or whatever. They're, for the most part, cowards. And they're not going to participate in the battles themselves. Abner and Joab are sitting there and they're like, hey, let's take 12 men from one side and 12 men from the other side, and let's put them in a contest. Instead of having a big battle, let's just put 12 from each side in a contest and see who wins. That's what they do. So we've got 12 of Abner's young men, 12 of Joab's young men, and they're in this game. They're get up to play, but this is a game to the death. You know, like sometimes you see in movies or something like that, you know, gladiator games or something like that. And as it turns out, all of them die. All 12 from the one side and all 12 from the other side. They stick swords in each other and they fall down dead. So we haven't decided anything. We still have a stalemate because it's a tie, basically. 12 to 12. So now Joab has lost 12 men and Abner has lost 12 men in this kind of one-on-one contest that they set up. Joab and Abner didn't do anything. Yeah. Why didn't they fight against each other? No, they just, they want the young men to do that. So, you can see, in the realities of war are the the realities of war are, the young men wind up taking all the abuse. The older guys, the generals or whatever, they're more about political stuff. They're not really interested in fighting. They're just interested in power. And so that's the way it was here. That's the way it's always been. So then, after that, verse 17, and there was a very sore battle that day. So after this little contest, we wind up with just a full-on battle between Joab and Abner's guys. It's kind of like a bar fight or something, I guess. They started out, they got this fight. All 12 of these guys all 24 rather, 12 from one 12 side, 12 from the other side, fall down dead. Now we're just getting into a big fight. This whole big battle. So verse 17, and there was a very sore battle that day, and Abner was beaten, and the men of Israel before the servants of David. So the servants of David got the upper hand against Abner and his people. Really beat them pretty bad if you look at the numbers here in just a little bit. Verse 18, and there were 3 sons of Zeruiah there, Joab and Abishai and Asahel. And Asahel was as light of foot as a wild roe. So 3 sons of Zeruiah, 3 of David's nephews, are in this battle against Abner and his men. And David's men beat Abner's men very badly. And now we have Asahel here, who is probably the youngest. He is a very fast runner. He's light on his feet. Verse 19, and Asahel pursued after Abner, and in going he turned not to the right hand nor to the left from following Abner. So Asahel probably wants a little bit of glory. He's going after the top dog because Abner and his army have been defeated. They are fleeing. Now Abner is an old man at this point. He is the first cousin of Saul, and Saul died around 70 or so. I don't think Abner's running away from Asahel. I think Abner's probably in a chariot or something like that. But Asahel's so fast that he's following and he's keeping pace with Abner as he's running to try to defeat Abner. Verse 20, then Abner looked behind him and said, Art thou Asahel? And he answered, I am. And Abner said to him, Turn thee aside to thy right hand or to thy left, and lay thee hold on one of the young men, and take thee his armor. But Asahel would not turn aside from following of him. So Asahel just wants Abner. He wants the glory of defeating the toughest guy in all of Israel, who's Abner. Verse 22, and Abner said again to Asahel, Turn thee aside from following me. Wherefore should I smite thee to the ground? And how then should I hold up my face to Joab, thy brother? He's like, Joab, your brother, he's pretty tough too. He's a pretty tough fighter. Been in a lot of battles. Abner doesn't really want to face Joab. And he says, Asahel, if I kill you, then I'm going to have to answer to Joab, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm asking you again to stop chasing me. Asahel probably should have stopped chasing Abner. Abner's running away. So why chase him? And the Bible is pretty clear on that concept, by the way. If someone is running away from you, you're not to use deadly force against them. We see that in the first 5 books of the Bible. If, for example, the Bible does lay out a case. Let's say that your house is broken into. If it's at night, you have the right to defend yourself and kill the person that broke into your house. But if it's daylight and you startle them and they run away, this is in the Bible. You're not supposed to chase after them and kill them. No, that's not not right and not legal in the eyes of God. Yeah, I say that to say this. We've had a lot of incidences in the United States of America. There was one, I think, somewhere close by maybe, where there was a black guy that was running out of a neighborhood, and some white guys were chasing him in a truck, and they killed him, and then they claimed self-defense or something like that. No, it's not. That should never have happened. If he's run away, there's no use in using there's no sense in using deadly force. None at all. So, Abner's fleeing. So he's trying to get Asahel not to follow him. So verse 23, I just kind of picture this in my mind. Verse 23, howbeit he refused to turn aside. Wherefore Abner, with the hinder end of the spear, smote him under the 5th rib, that the spear came out behind him, and he fell down there and died in the same place. And it came to pass that as many as came to the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. So I just picture this, and the Bible doesn't give us a whole lot of detail here, probably so you can just let your imagination run wild. But I picture Abner running along in a chariot. Asahel's running along behind him. He tries to get Asahel to turn aside. He's like, look, I'm going to kill you. I don't want to do it. Asahel doesn't listen to him. He probably just pulls the horses up short and drops the spear behind him because he gets him with the butt end of the spear. And Asahel probably just runs right into it, and it went all the way through him. Because you see, old guys know how to fight dirty. So, we have the experience to fight to win. Asahel, he's a young guy. He's probably thinking, Abner's going to stop the chariot and jump off and turn around. We're going to duel to the death with swords. That's not the case. He just hits him with the butt end of his spear. It runs through him and he dies. So however he did that, I don't know. He probably just used Asahel's momentum as well, because it's not the sharp end of the spear, it's the other end of the spear that he run through him with. So it had to have been going at a pretty good momentum there, I would think. So anyways, Asahel is now dead, but he had every opportunity to get away from this. Verse 24, and Joab also and Abishai, so they are Asahel's brothers, pursued after Abner, and the sun went down when they were come to the hill of Ammon that lieth before Giah by the way of the wilderness of Gibeon. And the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together after Abner and became one troop and stood on the top of an hill. And Abner called to Joab and said, Shall the sword devour forever? Knowest thou not that it will be bitterness in the latter end? How long shall it be then, ere thou bid the people return from following their brethren? So Abner kind of becomes the voice of reason here. Of course, he sees that his plan is a lost cause. He cannot defeat Joab. So he tries to reason with him. He tells Joab, he says, look, this has been a long day. We started out with these games this morning that killed 24 people. And then we had this big battle. It's been going. We're trying to get away from you. And now his troop, which are of Benjamin, they're on top of a hill kind of making a last stand with him. He calls out to Joab and he says, haven't we had enough, for one day? How long do we want to continue to do this to kill each other because we are brethren? Verse 27, and Joab said, As God liveth, unless thou hadst spoken, surely then in the morning the people had gone up every one from following his brother. So he said, if you hadn't said that, we'd have probably gone on up still to fight you. So, somebody's got to kind of be the man to say, hey, what are we doing here? Somebody's got to kind of be the guy to say, can we not do this another way? Or, I see now that what we're doing here is a mistake, something like that. And that was Abner in this case. Verse 28, so Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and pursued after Israel no more, neither fought they any more. And Abner and his men walked all that night through the plain and passed over Jordan and went through at Bithron, and they came to Mahanaim. And Joab returned from following Abner. And when he had gathered all the people together, there lacked of David's servants 19 men and Asahel. Now we remember that at the very beginning of the battle, 12 of them died. So there were 19 plus Asahel that wound up dying, so there were 8 more that died in the battle that they had. So David lost 20 of his 600 men. But, verse 31, but the servants of David had smitten of Benjamin and Abner's men, so that 360 men died. So Abner lost 360 men, and David lost 20. So we see, of course, who won this battle very clearly. David and his men won it. Verse 32, and they took up Asahel and buried him in the sepulchre of his father, which was in Bethlehem, and Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at the break of day. So it's an interesting story. There's a lot of good things in it. What can we learn from this, especially spiritually? How about we learn that nothing good comes from civil war? The United States had a civil war, right? When we look at the United States, we were all united. Then the southern states broke off. They created their own nation. We had this big battle, the bloodiest war in the United States history. And after it was done, we were all united again. And there really wasn't that much that was accomplished as a result of the Civil War. Now, of course, there was, the freeing of slavery and things like that. But that, they were going to be freed. The southern states said, well, we're going to break away so that they're not freed. But the southern states, they didn't get anything out of this. They lost, everything. The only thing that happened is, the United States lost a lot of people. That's really, when it comes right down to it. So civil wars are never good because they're having a civil war right here. Israel's having a civil war right here, and nothing has been accomplished. The only thing that's happened is people have died. That's it. And let's take it to churches. Churches have civil wars, right? They get into arguments. They wind up splitting. And, the people that split away, they're not happy. The people that stay, they're not happy. The fighting, it doesn't really do any good. We can see that here because everything's in the Bible for a reason. So this story was put here for us to learn something from it. And what we can learn from it is that you really don't gain anything from fighting amongst yourselves. Nothing. I mean, there is a time to fight. If your nation is, for example, World War II, this is probably a time to fight because, we are having to defend ourselves against other nations. That's a time to fight. But fighting amongst yourselves, it never works out. It never works very well. And it's always the most hateful, bloodiest battle of them all. I've heard people talk about, there's going to be a civil war in the United States right now because we have a big cultural war divide. There's never been a bigger difference in the United States today between like Republicans and Democrats and all of that. And they can fight themselves all they want to, but nothing good's going to come of it. The only group that will benefit from our political civil war infighting in the United States of America is China. They're the only ones that are going to benefit from it. But we can't see that. We're too busy fighting amongst ourselves. And we don't learn. We don't learn from the Bible. We definitely don't learn from the Bible because we don't even study the Bible anymore as a nation. So we can learn, I think we can learn some things like that from this scripture. These guys sit down, they try to solve their differences through violence and through fighting, and it actually solves nothing. They go away, and they're still a nation of Israel, they're still a nation of Judah, they're still battling each other. And if you look down there at chapter 3, verse 1, we can see now there was long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. So this fighting does continue over the course of several years. And Saul's house gets weaker and weaker as David's house gets stronger and stronger. But Abner should have known because he was very close to Saul. And Saul knew that David was going to be the next king. He said it all the time. I know that God is with you, that you're going to be the next king. Well, Abner's right there beside him. He knows also that David is supposed to be the next king, but he's too stubborn and too proud to give up what he's got. Because David does not want Abner killed. And we'll see that later in 2 Samuel. David doesn't want to kill Abner. But it winds up happening because Abner's just too stubborn to let go of what he's got. Too stubborn to let go and too proud to let go of that power. So it's going to be some interesting chapters here in 2 Samuel. A lot of fighting, a lot of stories, that kind of thing, which I kind of like. Just some interesting stuff. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Dear the Father, Lord, I thank you for this day, for your many blessings to us, and for your word. Lord, the book of 2 Samuel, of course, very, very entertaining read, but also very valuable for us to learn lessons from. And Lord, as I say, they're applicable today as they were then. And so, Lord, I hope we can learn lessons from those stories that are in the Bible about what not to do, what to do, why we shouldn't do